Okay. Hello, everyone. On behalf of our International Grants Awareness Program, that is IGAP and EMBO, I welcome you all to the fifth webinar of our series. We usually cover topics on international funding opportunities, networking, and skill building. Today, we switch gears and we focus on a slightly different topic, and that is related to EMBO Press, that is open access. EMBO has recently transitioned to open access. What is the purpose of open access? What are the challenges? And what does it mean for open science? Let's hear from our speaker today. We welcome our speaker, Bernd Pulverer, Head EMBO Press, about moving to open science and open access and open science. Before we begin, a few housekeeping announcements. Please keep your mics on mute, but it'll be nice to have your videos on. The session is recorded on Zoom, and we are also live on YouTube. If you have questions, please use the chat box to type your questions and send them to us. We have a separate Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. Without further delay, I request Bernd to present his talk.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Rohini, for the invitation. I think that's my second talk actually on India Bioscience after a few years ago. And just on your opening statement that it's sort of changing gear, I think it's actually quite related to grant applications at the end of the day, because everything you do in science is currently shared through journal publishing, which is then in turn assessed by your funding agencies to decide whether to award you a grant or not. So this is something I won't really talk about today, but it's extremely relevant still to publish in places that your funders think are sort of worthy of their attention, let's say. So today, however, the focus is indeed on a subset of publishing, which is open access, and it's an interesting topic and is causing a lot of anxiety, especially also in India. So I will really welcome your feedback also, because our purpose is to provide things that are useful for you, journals that are useful for you, that support your science. And we realize some of these moves that we are undertaking are a challenge. So please do bring in comments, and if you have also comments afterwards, please contact me by email. Okay, so I'm going to share slides, speak about 45 minutes, and we'll definitely have time for questions at the end. Let's just go to presenter mode, if I can do that. Oops, I have to go back to the beginning, sorry. You see, okay. So can you see the slides? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk mostly about open access, but for the second about 20 minutes, I talk about open science as essentially the overreaching goal of open access. So my first points are going to be how to reach a fully open access environment that's also equitable. And that's very important, because often open access leads to distortions in the system, which lead to less fairness than before, which is completely opposite to the purpose of open access. I'm going to contrast a bit open access with open science, because that's something that's been very confusing to people, and actually make the point that open science needs further investment in dissemination, basic platforms and mechanisms. And I'm saying this because open access is often used as a mechanism to reduce costs in dissemination processes. So that's a counterpoint. And then I'm going to try to dissect a little bit how we are sort of reaching to the open science, into an open science world from the journal side, by making our papers real research objects, by essentially moving beyond the story about the science, which is sort of the classical journal paper, to adding data back into papers and methods back into papers in a way that allows you to actually work with the science. And one of the things I really want to emphasize, sort of spoiler here, is the concept of refereed preprints, which is something we're very excited about. So let's start with what open access actually is. It's essentially was designed already a long time ago. There was a thing called the Budapest and then the Berlin Declarations that basically said science should not be behind paywalls, because it's often typically taxpayer funded. So everybody, not just scientists, but anyone should be able to read this taxpayer funded science. And essentially, it is two components. It's to allow free reader access to each research paper, but importantly, with a license that allows you to also use this data and work with it openly. So it's not just free access, it's actually fully open access. That's a big difference. And also to have no embargo. So that's really important. Many journals had already free access to their papers after typically 6 months or 1 year embargo, and that in an open access world is not sufficient. However, what happened in the last decade, or maybe the last even 6-7 years, is that funders have sort of become impatient with the slow pace of open access policies at journals. So they changed the definition from that of open access to a given research paper to open access to the whole journal. And that sounds trivial, but it's actually completely pivotal because it changed how journals have to approach open access from a business perspective. And I'm going to try to illustrate this on the next slide. So, so in particular in Europe, this is becoming a strong mandate by many big and powerful funders, including an organization called Coalition S, which is a conglomerate of 24 sort of key funders that includes also a lot of philanthropic funders in the United States. So in essence, these funders have come together and sort of said open access only means if your paper is in an open access journal. It doesn't matter if your paper itself is open access, thereby excluding what's called hybrid journals from the equation, basically. So this means actually factually that from this year, many funders don't support hybrid journals at all. Now, there's a nuance here. Many funders initially said we will not allow you to publish in hybrid journals, and increasingly this is being watered down because there's a lot of pushback to not financially supporting you to publish in them. So that's an important difference when you choose where to publish. You may just have to finance it yourself, but still most funders now go to a policy where you still have a free choice where to publish. But for example, other funders, including the Gates Foundation, which funds a lot of research also in India and Africa, has gone further. And Gates is actually part of Plan S, but they've sort of broken ranks, if you want, and moved on and said we are not supporting any journal publishing now. We're only supporting open science, and they haven't defined what supporting open science means. At the moment, they're just saving 14 million euros in publishing budget. So we're trying to get out of them how they're going to reinvest that. But at the moment, it's just a money-saving exercise. But that's interesting. That's just a very recent development. So let's, in case you're not clear what the flavors of open access that exist are, and that's quite important to realize, there's two main flavors. One is called gold open access, which is something that we strongly support at EMBO, and that's really de rigueur in Europe. So it essentially means the final paper is published with a Creative Commons license in a way in the final journal that allows, that basically guarantees stable archiving, that guarantees correction of the papers and retractions where necessary, etc. And it also is nowadays defined typically with a CC BY license. So there's several CC licenses. I'm going to come to this on the next slide, but typically it's a CC BY license that's required. Now, so that's called the version of record or gold open access publishing. Now, many countries outside of Europe have actually gone another way and support what's called green open access. That means that a pre-publication version of the paper is what's typically called self-archived, and that can include preprinting, by the way. But it is typically nowadays the so-called author-accepted manuscript, and that's actually an achievement from funders. They've essentially pressurized publishers to give up their claim that they are doing the peer review process, so they should have the sort of the benefit of your revision through peer review. So nowadays, most journals actually allow you to post so-called green open access, the author-accepted manuscript version, which means post-review, but pre any copy editing, any curation by the journal, or any typesetting in the journal, and of course outside of the journal platform. Again, mostly green open access nowadays requires CC BY licenses, though. And that's something, again, where most funders have sort of taken the plunge, even though it's very risky to their business models, and allow green open access. The third component I want you to sort of be aware of is what's called the rights retention strategy. And I'm not going to go into this because it's legally and quite boring and legal stuff, but it basically just means that you as an author should claim your rights to the copyright of your own research. So when you choose a journal, just make sure that the journal gives you all the rights as an author that you maybe assume you have anyway, but some journals don't. So that's why many open access funders require journals that they support to sign what's called a rights retention strategy document. So just be aware that some funders actually require gold open access, mostly European ones, and some allow the green open access route. And actually, Plan S has recently watered down its purely gold open access policies to allow green open access again. For us as journalists, that's a complete nightmare because the funders are on the one hand forcing us to do something, and then they're backtracking. So it's becoming very difficult. But that's where we are. So what do we have at EMBO? What do we have as open access? So basically, every article we publish is now published gold open access with a CC BY 4.0. So that's the most up-to-date CC BY license. And that's financed through the so-called article processing charge. And we're going to come to this in just a second. However, we're going to publish any paper irrespective of the author's ability to pay. So we call this community open access. So this is our sort of attempt to be equitable. You should also be aware that every article that's published is mirrored almost in real time in PubMed Central and EuroPubMed Central, which are fully openly accessible centralized databases for research papers. Furthermore, we now mandate that all the source data underlying our figures are posted for free. That's something that we finance internally on our own platform called BioStudies with a so-called CC0 license, which is essentially a license waiver which allows anyone to work with the data that you post fully. So if you have questions on this, let's come back to this later, because the CC0 license is extremely open, but that's required for really working with data. We also encourage protocols posting, and we have structured methods in all of our research papers now from this year, actually. And we support protocols.io particularly, which is essentially free platform for structured protocols posting, which is also on a CC BY basis. So basically every EMBO paper and every EMBO journal is gold open access. We're meeting all global funder mandates towards open access. And I also really want to emphasize that our real passion is open science, not open access. And I sort of explained before that there's a sort of tension between these. If you're not aware with all the licenses that are available, I put them on the bottom right here. I'm not going to explain all of them. If you have questions, let's come back to this. But generally, open access is moving pretty much into the CC BY, which is the most open license. So where were we last year? We basically had 3 open access journals of our 5 journals. One of them, Molecular Systems Biology, was actually founded as one of the very first open access journals in biology in 2005, just a couple of years after PLOS, which was the very first journals. And we had 2 hybrid, so-called hybrid journals called EMBO Journal and EMBO Reports, which are our 2 biggest journals. And the reason this worked very well is that we could cross-subsidize essentially our open access. We used to charge only 3,500 euros for open access in these open access journals because that was very sustainable, but it was cross-subsidized. And that's why the charges we have now surprise some people. That's where we are today. We moved all the journals to open access from 1st of January of this year, and you can read up about this on our websites. And the charges are this. So basically research papers cost about 6,500 euros now. And apart from Life Science Alliance, which charges about half of that. So, and we can discuss why this price difference. I should mention that this includes about 1/5 of surplus income at the moment that is invested into EMBO programs, such as, our activities in India. So India is actually a member of EMBO, which is the European Molecular Biology Organization. Sorry, I forgot to introduce this, but we basically support scientists through all kinds of means by organizing conferences, quite a few in India now, actually, but also training. And we give grants, very importantly, to young scientists, postdoctoral fellowships, but also, if you're interested, to what we call young investigators, which are young PIs, so first of PIs. So that is reinvested into all of these activities. And actually, we just had our finance meeting yesterday at EMBO, and it's tough times now for funding globally. So this is quite an important income for EMBO to allow us to fund so many postdocs. So that's an interesting question, if journals should generate income for non-for-profit organizations, which we can discuss in the discussion if you want. So however, why are these costs so high? It's really mostly down to our acceptance rate. So we publish only about 10 to 15% of the papers submitted at all of our journals, but Life Science Alliance, which has a much higher acceptance rate. So that's why you can already see why the costs are different there. It's also, though, because we're running on what we call scientific editors. So we have about 23 on our staff here at EMBO, and we, including myself, and we think that's a very good system. We can discuss if it is or not separately. This is not what the talk is about, but I just want you to be aware that journals, so there's many community journals that actually run with so-called academic scientific editors. And that sounds initially like it would be much, much cheaper and more efficient. The reality is, if these academic editors are fully paid, as they are in in eLife, for example, another open access journal, it turns out to cost exactly the same. If they're not paid, so you do this as a voluntary job on the side, which we really is an amazing, amazing contribution. It still costs you time, and it takes your time away from doing experiments. So in essence, your funders are subsidizing it then, and so the money comes from somewhere, and it's those same funders that publish the APCs for your papers. So the costs are in the system. It really doesn't matter if a professional in-house editor does it or an academic editor does it. It just appears to be cheaper. So I think it's very important to start to do proper economic costing of these things, because that's not often done. And then another big cost for us is that we invest a huge amount in research integrity screening, curation exercises, and quality assurance. And about 4 of our staff are really dedicated just to doing that. And these are, of course, things that could be dropped, but we really don't want to do that. But many journals, and you'll see in a second, open access is a relentless race to cut costs, basically. And that's why the journals that really thrive in open access are so-called, what I would call low threshold journals, that have dropped all of these activities, essentially, to cut costs. And I would say cut corners, and that's not really supporting science. The other thing that costs a lot of money for us is so-called, you may want to call the front end of the journals. That's all the journalism we have, the commentaries, the reviews. None of these are easily financeable through open access. And that's a big challenge for us, because effectively the research papers are cross-financing those activities. And again, the pressure is, shall we just drop all of this? So this can also include, by the way, all kinds of things such as podcasts, news and views articles, and so on. Because funders pay for none of this. So should we drop all of this because it's not useful? The funders are sort of saying it's not useful. So let's, however, we see a lot of people read these things. So again, your feedback would be very interesting there. And of course, maintaining the platform, the production process, and ensuring digital archiving is as constant as possible, and so on. However, we have managed to cut costs really quite dramatically, but at least 20 to 30%. And that's partially due to increasing automation, and AI is, of course, a really big game changer there going forward. But also because we have a much more efficient manuscript transfer system, so to sort of reduce the effective low acceptance rate, or to increase the low acceptance rate that we have effectively. And we're doing this now, including Nature journals, for example. We have a transfer network with Nature journals, which involves a financial rebate. excuse me. So we've also, because of these costs, and because these costs raise a lot of eyebrows, for some years now, for about 6 years, we've published our finances to sort of try to illustrate the costs of this, and invite you to look at this online. But it just shows that we're basically not for profit. So there is this surplus I mentioned of 22%, and the costs are really divided between the EMBO Press office and the sort of platform costs and the sort of hardware costs, if you want. Just a few quotes of people to show that this is really non-trivial. So even people in well-funded countries such as Hong Kong, USA, and Switzerland sort of say, so from the funder side or from the research side, is that basically what we charge is surprisingly high. And in India, of course, it's really painful. So basically, when we visited last March, literally everybody said above 3,000 is really unsustainable for us. So on the other hand, we also did a big survey that showed that really interestingly, so we asked what people really care about, and it turns out that open access was really a little bit further down on the ranking of what people cared about that journals should do. It was mostly about prestige of the journals, about efficacy of the journals, about things like impact factor, transparent processes, so the policies that we have. But really less passion about open access, and even less passion, shockingly, about open science, actually, which is what we really care about. So why are we actually flipping at all to full open access? Well, it's really because of these funder mandates, which I mentioned, even though some of them are changing their policies backwards again a little bit, but also because of author choice. And I'm going to show you this in just a second here. Which is, again, of course, driven by funder mandates. But you can see for many years, we are basically increasing in the proportion in our two hybrid journals of the open access papers. And we basically reached 70% of content that was already open access anyway. And at this point, basically, libraries start to unsubscribe anyway to the journal. So it sort of goes into an automatic flip to open access, if you want. But it's also something that we actually believe in, and it's consistent with the EMBO statutes, which basically say the organization should support science in any way it can. And we think being open access is actually the optimal way to support science ultimately. And I just want to make a point that we don't really believe in green open access as a viable option. It's a workaround. It essentially sounds like it's a way to cut costs, but the reality is, if you counted up the real economic costs to the world of running green and journals side by side, it would be much, much higher, because you basically have to replicate all kinds of repositories in parallel, often at the institutional level, which is extremely inefficient. It's often not scalable, not interoperable, these databases. And they're often funded on a year-by-year basis, so they're unstable. So I would say it's economically very questionable to say green open access sorts out the open access issue at all. And also, it causes what I call versioning hell. So you're basically stuck with two versions of a paper, the sort of version of record that I mentioned, which can be behind paywalls, and then the green pre-publication version of the paper, which can be substantially different, which both sit there, and often the green version is, of course, the one that's read because it's free. This is not ideal. So just to show you that open access is still the core part of the European policy. For example, the European Commission has released a sort of 8 key points about its scientific program, and one of point 4 is scholarly communication should be open access to publication and data. So this includes open science too. But you can see that they don't specify green or gold per se. And the same goes for many other funders in Coalition S, which I mentioned. So let's think about the equity problem. So we're using an article charging mechanism. So the problem is really that the equity problem existed before, because not everyone, and that's what led to the launch of open access initially, interestingly, because it was seen as inequitable that many countries could not afford to subscribe to journals to read the papers in the first place. So that's why open access for readers was seen to be so important. Now, the problem is we can flip this very quickly to being fair to readers, but unfair to authors. And the reason why this is so visible now is that there's so much fewer authors than readers. So any sort of inequity is amplified because, especially in selective journals, because there's so few authors, so the prices just skyrocket massively. But the money is in the system and was always there. I really have to emphasize this. So we're particularly looking, of course, at the global South and the European East. But we're also looking at early career researchers that often don't have the same funding mechanisms as senior people. There's a huge heterogeneity between funding support, as I mentioned, and there's also big problems on the institutional side because many institutions now are in this hybrid zone where they're still paying subscription fees at the same time, and they're often sold in bundles, these journals, by big commercial publishers. So as we're going open access, they're sort of paying double because they also have to support open access publications. So that's why many are reluctant to give you money to pay for your open access fees. But I would encourage you to challenge your librarian to say, well, listen, if you believe in open access, you really should pry the money away from your subscriptions and reinvest it into open access journals, because otherwise the libraries just assume you pick it up from your research budgets, and that is not the intent of open access. But it's happening all around the world that people have to dip into their research budgets to pay for open access, which are not designed to do that. So basically, you have to push back and have discussions with your librarians or faculty and deans to make sure that you have access to support to publish in open access journals if they want the world to go open access, because otherwise it's not sustainable. So we have recently launched something that's really important, I think, and that really allows me to say quite clearly, I think, that we are equitable. So we have decided to stratify our open access charges by country. And this is based, which is quite nice, I think, based not just on GDP, which again is very distorting, but it's based on GDP plus scientific funding in a given country, and also the claims history for waiver and discount claims in a given country. And we're doing this together with our publishing partner, Springer Nature. And you can see India, for example, is getting a 25% off the charge, which comes out at 1,623 euros rather than 6,500. So we think this is hopefully sustainable, but it hopefully also makes it sustainable for authors in India. And I should also say, on top of this, we have discounts and waivers to charges for any authors in any of these countries who put a claim in. And we also actually waive the charges anyway, this year at least, until we can't afford it anymore for a number of EMBO member countries, including India. So it's completely free for scientists in India to publish, at least for 2024 still. Also, all EMBO fundees get free access, so at the more senior level. So this is young investigators, global investigators, and installation grantees get this part of the funding that you get, that you have free access. So I briefly did want to tell you that that there's a couple of different mechanisms to pay for open access. One of them is called Subscribe to Open, which is basically that you keep your journal almost the same as a subscription journal, but you just tell your librarians that you take it open access anyway, and they should continue paying their subscriptions, because if they don't, you will take it away from open access again. So this sounds like a sort of very shaky model, but it's getting some traction in the United States in particular, and some big publishers like the American Society for Microbiology, which is very big and non-for-profit, of course, has just moved to that model. So in the United States in particular, it's becoming an interesting idea. And then there's the so-called diamond open access, which is basically, let's make it all free because we get core funding to publish the papers. So when we pitched this to our funding countries, this didn't fly very well, and they basically don't see the point of paying for our journals at the moment. But that's certainly something that can be done. And for example, a journal like eLife is deceptively cheap because it's essentially funded directly by a number of funding organizations, which again, the costs are there. The costs are the same. It's just they give the money directly to the journal rather than through you. And PLOS has gone to a community action model, which is an interesting sort of membership model, which I won't explain in detail. But that's the Public Library of Science, the inventor of open access, basically. So basically, I just wanted to also tell you that, but I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to run over this. I think it's taking too long, but just to
You have another 15 minutes. So
yeah, I want to go to open science because otherwise I'm going to not going to be able to tell you the exciting stuff about that. So just so that you're aware that when you submit a paper, there's a structured way that you can basically click in for waivers if you need them. But as I mentioned, in India, that's not relevant because you won't have any charges anyway for now. And maybe one point about why this thing is extremely complex for us is that there's many publishing agreements that are meant to cover the open access fees for you on a more systematic basis than through individual authors paying. And these were called transformative agreements, and we had many of these, 34 of them. And what's sort of disappointing is that they're not all translating into open access agreements. So these agreements are only made for hybrid journals. But as we turned open access, we're down to 6 agreements now, and there's none in India right now. So if you're discussing this with your faculty and librarians, it'll be interesting to discuss the interest in setting up these sort of more global agreements for fully open access journals, because it defeats the purpose to do this for hybrid journals which are transitioning to open access and then let them drop off once they are open access. So I did want to make a point about low threshold open access, because that's also a big problem that we see with scientists, with publishers and scientists in India, but many other countries too. So basically, there was an explosion in so-called high acceptance rate or low threshold journals. That was sort of started off by a journal called PLOS One, which is an absolutely legitimate journal, and then was emulated a few years later by a Nature journal called Scientific Reports, Nature Publishing Group, and these became so-called mega journals. They just published they publish more than all the other journals together, essentially, because it's very easy to get in, it's quite cheap, and they basically do minimal checks and balances. This then led to other publishers. So these are both very legitimate operations, but this then led to other actors basically to get in on the act, because as authors pay and as authors are desperate to publish, you can imagine that this sounds like a great business idea to basically increase the acceptance rate, to give authors what they want, a published paper, and charge them for it. And this is essentially through this publish or perish culture that we've developed, where everything is counted by the papers you publish, that basically have led to this explosion of open access publishers that are there to exploit you. So I think it's very important that you're aware that the journals you submit to should really add value to the system. And I'm not saying that MDPI doesn't, but there's certainly journals, for example, in India, the Omics group, which is in Hyderabad, or was in Hyderabad, was one that was actually officially criminalized by the US government. So it's a slippery slope from there to really criminal activity. And on top of this, we have the problem of so-called fake papers or paper mills, which are again on the criminal side of this, purely designed to extract money from you for doing essentially nothing. And just this morning, I was actually dealing with 3 different papers co-submitted from China, apparently via US proxy server, with the same figures, different authors, different texts to different journals at EMBO. So and it turns out it's probably these are deep fake papers, because they actually use quite famous Chinese scientists who are probably not aware that they're even on the paper. So we're contacting them now. But this is, what I talk about with the research integrity screening. We find these because we have technology to try to find these things. Huge amount of work, and really, really tragic that this is happening. So, but you can deal with it. So the Chinese government has basically decided to blacklist some of these, and you can see within months, without going into details, within months, these journals just collapse if they're blacklisted by the Chinese Academy of Sciences. It's really quite dramatic. But it's a huge problem. So just be aware when you submit that you go to a legitimate journal, even if it looks like it costs more. So quickly to open science. So a paper is basically just the tip of the iceberg of all the data, the results you generated. And I think open science is really just designed to get the iceberg afloat to liberate more of this really valuable data. So there's sort of three components to open science. The data is the core component. And essentially at EMBO, we now for some years have a mandate to have source data with every figure panel that you publish. And we have a lot of curation effort to help you with that posting. And I'm not going to go to any details on this, but we're very excited to make your papers much more discoverable through data-directed search. So we provide free curation, free data hosting for your data. So you have a citable long-term archive for all of your data, which is often, by the way, a mandate for you from your research institution too. And we have figure panel authorship, which is really important because you can essentially sign off as an author on every single figure panel now, which gives credit to all the middle authors, which are often forgotten in the wash. But also, open science includes methods and protocols, and that's often forgotten. But data without proper protocols and methods are useless. So we've now started to mandate structured methods in every paper, and we have links to these protocols I/O, which I mentioned. And then we talked about open access. Here's a few of the platforms that we've launched to help you with this. Again, I have not much time to go into anything apart from source data and review comments. And that's what I show you just now to finish the talk. But just to be aware that open science is again a formally defined entity, if you want, that's strongly supported in the EU now as a scientific output. So this is something which is becoming very strongly mandated also. And many US funders and European funders now require that you have data management plans and demonstrate that you share the data, not just the papers, which is great. Why is all of this important? It all started, if you're not convinced, it all started really with the Human Genome Project, which really showed that 24/7 data sharing was absolutely incredibly powerful because it allowed Craig Ventis shotgun sequencing to almost overtake the Human Genome Project. But that fed back on the Human Genome Project to get their act together and come in under budget and under time. So this is a great example of why 24/7 data release was incredibly powerful. And the other great example is COVID, of course, which led to an unheard of vaccine development speed, which was really phenomenal because of the data release. But I should mention that the person who did that without government permission actually got locked out of his lab a few weeks ago. So there's a punishment for that, which is really, really, really unfortunate. I'm not going to go to this. There's another side to the coin, which is that the data was not released for the fish market swabs, which led to a huge amount of speculation where the origin, where the zoonosis event happened in the lab or in the wet market. So again, with open science, this would have not happened in the first place. But let's not go into this into detail. If you're not aware of preprints, they are now de rigueur in the biological sciences. You should not worry. Any quality journals supports preprints, and most of our papers and other quality journals papers now have preprint versions of them. There was concerns about, of course, scooping. Why to preprint would open you up for scooping. We have a very clear policy to say that from your day of preprint posting, you're protected from being scooped by other papers or preprints. So again, when you choose a journal, you can go to journals that give you that support if you're concerned about this. And then, of course, the question of expert validation, which came up very strongly in COVID, where a lot of dodgy preprints started to be published. That's something where we are very interested with our review comments project. And I'm going to tell you now what that is, and then we're going to finish very soon. So review comments is basically just a mechanism, an open science mechanism to turn the whole journal system upside down. So we're starting with a preprint, and then we're providing you a peer review service without journals, but at the quality of an EMBO journal level, essentially. When you get your 3 reports in, it's automatically posted on bioRxiv as a so-called refereed preprint. And you can leave it there, it's completely free. And then you have a preprint with 3 referee reports that people can already analyze and work with. and that can count for your research assessment exercise in principle. However, most people want to publish in journals, so we have these member journals, and that's a growing group that basically have committed to using exactly those referee reports in their own assessment. And you can click to up to 4 of these in series. If Journal A doesn't want it, you just go to Journal B. Journal B doesn't know Journal A looked at it, but sees the same referee reports. So that increases the efficacy massively and decreases our costs also, by the way. We're also excited because it allows the referees to focus on the science, not so much the journal fit, which hopefully reduces a bit of the subjectivity in peer review. So we have evidence this actually works. I'm not going to show you the detail, but I do want to make one point that at EMBO level, and that's the nice thing about EMBO, we can always look at this holistically, not just at the journal or funder level. We are funders. So our funding activities now take referee preprints into account when we are looking for EMBO fellowships and EMBO young investigators. So a referee preprint counts just as much as a first author or senior author research paper, which is more work for the committees because they have to read the referee reports and the preprint, but they can do it because there are the referee reports. Without the referee reports, it's really, really hard for committees to analyze preprints. So we're very excited that this can actually make a big difference. So just a couple of two more minutes to finish on data now. So basic data, we for many years have a format to cite data sets outside of journals, so that's really important. But classic data and research papers are the sort of forgotten bit, the black hole in research papers. So just to illustrate this, a typical figure in a paper has individual cells and individual embryos, or sort of a Western blot, one example of a Western blot that's purely illustrative of what you're basically saying in the text. What we really want is to sort of emulate what you had in your lab books and show all the replicates and the raw data as much as possible. Or to put this another way, you're compressing your data into a series of pixels that you can't really analyze at all. So if you have a graph, you cannot extract it and find the KM from the graph, etc. So this is what this has led to, that people really think about figures more as illustrations, such as in this cell biology paper, which looks not like data, but it is data apparently. And it took us 3 rounds of email exchanges to convince the authors to post the real data, which is on the right. And now, of course, with source data, you can extract the raw data and replot it and redo the statistics. But you can see that many people just think of the data as an illustration of what they found. And here you now have, for example, mitochondria. You have in your figure still the nice false colored mitochondrium that is nice for the general reader, but you click on that and you have a bigger view. You have a higher resolution view with metadata, and you can show all the replicates you want. And it's all for free. Down there, you have a bar chart with all the data points. Again, you can click on that and extract all the raw data from that. So that's how it looks in reality on with this biostudies, which I mentioned, platform, which is basically an avatar version of the paper, which has the same authorship, same abstract, but then is a very structured format of the paper, and the figure panel authorship that I mentioned. Okay, and the thing we're working on now is to move the data. So this data submission requirement is only at the final acceptance stage. We want to, as a next step, move this, and that's my last slide, I think, move this forward to the submission step, because that is really pivotal, that we actually will have referees look at the data, not just the pretty pictures about the data. And that's a really, really big step. And we are very well aware that that's a lot of extra friction in the process. But we're now, as a first step, starting to activate younger researchers into our peer review process. So we have a pilot now with postdoc level peer review. And ultimately, our sort of vision is in 5 years or so, we will focus them on data in the paper specifically, and particularly in data in their own expertise. So rather than looking at the sort of interest or the plausibility peer review, which I call plausibility peer review, which is still valuable, we want these people to focus on the data itself. And we're setting up a platform called S-Dash to allow this. So this is it. I just wanted to say that we just got, we're going to release in the next week or so the ProMap standards on how to post protocols and methods properly in papers. And this is it. Just to remind you that it's a huge, complex world out there. I talked mostly about journals today. It's 30,000 journals out there, but we want to unleash this iceberg of data and share the valid part of that. data, not the unreliable part. And that's a really big challenge. We have preprints, we have structured databases, which all struggle to be supported financially, by the way. We need to work on curation exercises that work together with the journals to make sure that this data is as useful as possible. So this is a really active and exciting world now where AI, of course, will change everything. So if you have any comments or questions, let me know. I will stop sharing, I think, to make it a bit more.
Thank you, Bernd. You actually finished 5 minutes earlier, so we still had 5 minutes. But
Oh, I can talk forever if you want, but maybe not.
that was an informational and insightful webinar. And I'm sure researchers in India are advocating for open science, but open science and open access, the way it is perceived is very different. And you've created a very different awareness of the whole concept. I particularly like the term you used initially, that is taxpayer funded science. I think it actually makes the meaning so much clear. I think that is how we should start calling it.
Great. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, thank you. So we move to the questions. I can see the Karishma's question. Karishma, you can actually unmute and ask your question.
All right. Thank you for giving me an opportunity. So, Bernd, good to see you again. Really great to see you. And we always enjoy your chats. So, Bernd, firstly, India has talked about these country-specific repositories. Like, should we have an India RXIV, for example? And obviously, it will come with some mandate that all research funded by Government of India should be posted on this one-stop place. What are your thoughts on these country-specific repositories? That was my question.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very interesting. So I was a bit negative, as you may have seen, about this green open access. At the level of individual institution, I think it's really not efficient because institutions really struggle to keep these things up and to make them interoperable, which is the whole purpose, of course. Now it's still maybe meaningful at the institution level to set up a sort of 24/7 short-term data deposition databases purely for research integrity purposes, because it's often very hard to share sort of raw data if you want. And we see a lot of issues when we see integrity issues, people struggle to find their raw data and so on. So I think that purpose is really important and legitimate. Now, at the national level, of course, it's a long-term discussion about, do we need many flowers to bloom, or sort of should we sort of go into singularity with these preprint servers, for example? And that's an open discussion. I think it's useful to have several one, because when anything that moves into a single platform situation becomes basically dominated by individuals, by certain interests that may be national based, maybe financially based, whatever based, but that's not always healthy. And a sort of healthy environment where you have some competition between different platforms is always a good thing, I think. So I think India is such a big country that it's sort of, I can see this making sense. I would, however, it would be a pity if all countries start to do their own thing, which I see a little bit happening in China, to potentially not share beyond your national boundaries. That would be a real pity, I think. So I think we should have a healthy ecosystem of platforms at every level: preprints, journals, and data repositories.
Thank you, Bernd and Karishma. Shamlan, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes, hello. I had actually a very simple question. So you spoke about these refereed preprints. Can these be considered equivalent to peer-reviewed publications, because somebody is going through it any which way, and those reports are available for people to view? So can these be considered equivalent to a peer-reviewed publication?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Well, exactly. So our take is yes, because essentially you don't have the journal decision on that refereed preprint. So the reason we're excited is so I was a co-founder of the San Francisco Declaration for Research Assessment, which made for 10 years now, pointed out the problem of journals deciding on research careers basically by their editorial decisions. mean, we as editors decide on journal fit. You know, we select papers that we want to publish for certain criteria. We don't, a rejection from EMBO journal or EMBO reports doesn't mean your data is in any way flawed or in any way not interesting. It's just not interesting enough for us. And if you then not get a job based on that, is really flawed. So in essence, the refereed preprint allows us to move beyond this in some way. But the reality is, of course, that many research assessment exercises are really stripped for time and go to this proxy of, oh, Bernd at EMBO thinks it's good, so let's just take his word for it and go for it. Or this and this impact factor, you know, may mean the same, which is even worse, by the way. So that's why the refereed preprint is really important, but it takes a lot of effort to get the funders to really see these as real research outputs that they can use. And at EMBO, it took us about, I think that Leo is on the call now, so it took us at least a year of discussion, but they did go for it for about half a year now, and I think they're actually quite excited by it. But you know, these committees are often populated by scientists. They're super busy, and they come in and say, "Oh my God, I have 300 applications. You want me now to read 3 referee reports for like 3 preprints in all of these publications?" That's like that's really hard to do. My answer to this is we'll need to resource research evaluation properly in the future. And that may include involving postdocs in making initial assessment on things by reading the referee reports in preprints, for example. So if you don't resource these things properly, then maybe also using AI, by the way. So we're now working on an AI system that will summarize these referee reports into a much more digestible form. So that could be, for example, a mechanism to allow humans then to absorb this information much faster. But in summary, yes, you can do it. At EMBO, we are doing it, but we are probably the only one at the moment. So you just have to encourage your favorite funder to start looking at these things. Maybe the Welcome India lines, that should be.
Thank you. There's another question by Karishma in the chat box. Karishma, do you want to go ahead and ask?
Oh, sure, definitely. Thank you. Moving from open access journals where there is some fee to make it open access to like repositories, like, you know, refereed preprints, do you think this is a practical way? Do you think it will be universally accepted in the near future, or are we still, you know, is it still a pipe dream?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be realistic, it's not a pipe dream, but it's still in the works. So I think everybody has to start to feed back on these things to their own institutions. Many are simply not aware of what's possible. And just by the way, to also be really clear, we also have a refereed preprint output from our journals. So when you get your review reports in at our journals, irrespective of being published or not, you can ask us to post the referee reports on the preprint version on bioarchives. So even if we reject you, you can post those reports, and if you think they're actually useful reports, and you know, as soon as this picks up and more journals do this, I think it will become scalable and funders will become interested. Right now, it's exceedingly rare because it's only EMBO and a few colleagues doing it. So we need to reach this critical mass where it becomes sort of de rigueur. But this takes, I think, you know, again, community action. I think if more and more people ask for these things, and we'll post more of these things because we're quite happy to do that, the funders will start to see more of them, and suddenly becomes less of a pipe dream, if you want. So it's sort of a call for community action because it's all free. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything.
Thank you. Dev Prasad, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. So my question is, so recently it was found that the AI is involved in the publication process in some way or other. So in future, is it possible like AI can do some level of peer reviewing preliminary stage and after that human review? So what is the scope and what can be the consequence of it? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great great question and really really interesting. In fact, I just gave a talk on this separately in Norway. So yes, absolutely. So AI is becoming relevant at every level, and you point out a very interesting one, which is very surprising because peer review would be the sort of, you might predict the last point where humans get replaced by machines, but actually they're really good at it. So the scary thing is, so I think it's an important point to make is it's human plus AI. That's absolutely crucial here. So AI is getting, of course, much better every day, but it's very limited in many ways, as are humans, by the way. So I think the combination of humans and AI is really really interesting, though, as a sort of tool for the human referee. And in particular, this will be very interesting also for doing what we call quality control. So to check all the sort of nitty-gritty, which is really hard for humans to do. So you know, are all the citations, for example, accurate? Are there citations missing? So we're developing tools, sort of refereeing tools, to help referees with those things. Now, to completely automate it, now you can rest assured that many journals are working on complete automation because it allows them to reduce the costs massively. That would really concern me because there's all kinds of issues, including biases, as you know, of course, but also still at some level hallucinations and just bizarrenesses that come out of these systems sometimes. So I would still always advocate, and the same goes, by the way, for our research integrity screening, always advocate for human supervision of these things. But they're fantastic tools to support these the peer review exercise itself. And what I mentioned also is we're using an AI now to summarize the referee reports, the human written referee reports, which looks quite promising. It's not launched yet. And also, of course, maybe one more point, you can, of course, as a human referee, use AI to help you write your report, as long, again, as you are sort of behind every word that is in the report. You can't just delegate this, which we see some referees do, unfortunately, delegate the exercise to AIs. And exactly the same comment applies to you as an author, by the way. So we're getting a lot of papers now which are super smoothly written, but are really veering off track really dramatically sometimes. So you really have to be in control of your AI.
Thank you. We have a question by Vashishta. You have raised your hand. You can ask your question.
Good evening, sir. I have one question regarding some policies at some countries, those who are giving some incentives for very nice type of publications. And is this possible in India so as to speed up this very nice initiative?
So it depends what you mean by nice. So we have this this situation, of course, in many countries where you get rewards baked into your funding or your personal salary, even in some countries, based on proxies such as the impact factor of the journal you publish in. Now that is really really misleading and difficult, outright dangerous, I would say, because it distorts the system. If you get rewards for, in terms of, for example, to support your own research, for posting data in an open science format, for example, that's something we would strongly support. I think that's the best way to encourage, sort of, to provide incentives to engage with open science, for example. So it really depends what you mean specifically. So I think it's important that you also maybe advocate to your at the national level and maybe funder level what incentives you think are actually constructive, not destructive incentives. I mean, what did you have in mind for incentives?
Vashishta, can you please clarify like what it means to you by incentives? In what way?
Madam, I just want to ask, some countries have policy to give some incentives for good type of publications, research publications, and such a type of policy will be helpful to speed up the initiative which is taken by this program.
Yeah, yeah. So I totally agree with that. I think we need incentives and sort of so rather than stick. So your question really is carrot or stick better? So stick means you basically force people to do certain things, and carrot is to incentivize it. I generally completely agree with you that incentives to good behavior is the best way.
Thank you. I have a question, Bernd. It is interesting to see the stratified OA charges for different countries. So once you had introduced those, did you see a change in trend in the papers that you got?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And so for example, when we waived the charges for authors from India, we were also a little bit nervous about this, quite honestly, but because it's such a big country. Actually, it's remarkably robust. We haven't seen any but it's really early days. So we've just started this a few weeks ago with the 5 bans. It's only months old about, but the waiving the charges for India is a bit older, but we haven't been inundated yet. But let's talk again next year maybe about this.
Certainly. So I'd request all participants to please think of more questions if we have a couple of minutes more. Until then, we have a question again by Karishma. Karishma, do you mind if I read out the question? So the question is, do EMBO Young Investigator Program Fellows and the Global Investigator Award applications accept or recognize refereed preprints?
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that we formally do now. And the important point to make is we don't so initially we only recognized it as a sort of an output that allows you to apply. So basically an entrance requirement if you want. But what's really important and was more difficult to get acceptance for was to also get the commitment that they use then in the evaluation process, just like a research paper. So it's two things that are necessary. One is the entrance requirement, the basic requirement, because we require, for example, for fellow to have 1 paper published, and that can be refereed preprint now, but also to incorporate it into the actual evaluation. Because the worst thing is you allow somebody to apply and then you whack them by saying it's not good enough.
Okay, thank you. A big thank you to Bernd. We come towards the end of today's session. This was really a very good and informational webinar. I would like to also thank all of you who have joined us today for this webinar. And thank you, Bernd, again for an engaging session. Arushi will be sending a feedback form. Please take a moment to fill the form. If you have missed any part of today's session, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel and also on our website. In today's webinar, Bernd mentioned the YIP, and that is the Young Investigator Program, and the Global Investigator Network. So if we've had, few months ago, we've had webinars on these 2 topics as well. All these videos are available on our IGAP webpage and under the videos section. So please feel free to take a look. Through IGAP, we bring to you curated resources and sessions on international funding opportunities, networking, and skill building. And Bernd rightly said that this is very much related to IGAP. It's not a change of gears. Our bi-monthly newsletters actually showcase all of these opportunities. If you haven't yet subscribed to our IGAP newsletter, what could be a better time than now? Please subscribe to our newsletter. We are also sharing the link to the newsletter if you haven't subscribed. For more information on upcoming events, please subscribe to the newsletter again and also follow us on social media and keep an eye out on our website. See you all. Bye and take care.
Thank you, Rohini and India Bioscience. That was great.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bernd.